the narrative CV in all of the funding streams we're looking at today, there is a request for the narrative CV, and this is a new thing for NIHR. It's sort of come across from UKRI and other funders, and I'm going to talk a little bit about why there's been this change towards narrative CV, and also how you sort of tackle it in your application. Just generally speaking, always look at the assessment criteria for your schemes, because in a sense, the things that you build into your background, your narrative CV, should try and tick those sorts of boxes. So I'm not going to go through all the specific assessment criteria for the awards we're looking at today, but do look at them and have them in your mind as you're putting your narrative CV together. Um, the sorts of things they ask, or the sorts of things you're being assessed on. So these are some examples of them rather than the specific criteria. Things like why you need the award at this point. So this might be to do with you, the appropriateness of your experience to date, your suitability, commitment, and ambition, your career goals, and how the award fits with these. So those are sort of things to do with you. So if we bring together the sorts of assessment criteria we're seeing for these schemes, the things that are about you, they tend to look at those sorts of things. In terms of the training plan, they're looking at the quality and the relevance of the training plan, suitability for the award, obviously, and what you're trying to do in the award, whether it's preparing, saying more about your research area, about the training that you need to do the sorts of things that are upcoming in the research that you're planning, etc. The skills and experience you've had to date and how these will help your next steps. Importantly, they look at the sort of support that you may have and where you're placing yourself in terms of supervision and mentorship. And this kind of a support has to be clearly detailed. It is something that will come through probably more in the host statement and when you talk about your supervisors. But again, it's important to bear these in mind because when we're talking about good research culture, for example, obviously they're looking for people who will in turn develop a good research culture. The potential for longer term support from the organisation and strong academic practitioner, academic environment. Planned research, what you're planning to do, and in these awards it's either a case for support for the Spark Award or the research area of interest, which is a kind of an overview, I suppose, of the sorts of things that Milensu is talking about in her presentation. So it's a kind of shortened version of the things that you're bearing in mind and how the funding will help with next stages in research. The potential of the proposal to deliver, whatever form that proposal is, the plan for working with people and communities that you have to date, and the sort of justification for funding. So broadly speaking, these are the assessment criteria. In terms of the narrative CV, we're probably looking more at those, the dark blue in the corner about who you are and what your background is. In terms of the sort of hosts organization, it's the things in orange, and then also your training plan is red. But it's worth bearing all of these assessment criteria in mind when you are thinking about writing your narrative CV. So what is a narrative CV? Well, it's basically a CV format that provides a structured written description of a person's contributions and achievements that reflects a broad range of relevant skills and experiences, more than can often be seen in a traditional academic CV. I mean, of course, I should say that you enter your ORCID ID when you put in an application, and therefore it is possible that reviewers will look at whatever you've got there, which might resemble more of a traditional academic CV, but the chances are that they won't. So nowadays they are judging you on the basis of this more narrative approach. But as you can see, what it's trying to do is to be more nuanced in finding out who you are, where you're from, what your background is, rather than just looking at how many publications that you might have. So why the move to narrative CVs? As UKRI say in enabling a broader range of people to evidence a wider variety of skills and experience, it helps see the whole person, helping identify the best people and ideas so that they can be supported to flourish. It's very much about quality, not quantity. So they might be asking you, or you might in your narrative CV, talk about perhaps some particularly impactful bits of audit or research that you've done, and a little story around that, rather than saying, I've got, a publication or a conference poster, just as a quantitative fact. It allows you to cover the full range of research activities. So that includes value, the value you add to your peers, so how you might be interacting and working with others. Jodie in her presentation talked a lot about bringing people with her, so how you are gathering other people and working with them in the research that you do. It can show how you've overcome barriers and made the most of opportunities, and it allows you to talk about, if necessary, non-research related work or life experience that's relevant to the application. So a standard CV wouldn't necessarily allow you to do that. It aims to reward a broader set of research-related activities. It values diverse contributions and career paths. It improves diversity and inclusion and encourages the responsible use of metrics, rather than, I suppose, the bonkers use of metrics, where we just say, oh, I've got 40 publications, I'm great. It's much more nuanced than that. So general guidance on the narrative CV, always look at the funder's guidance. It goes to that question. Although there is a kind of standard format to narrative CVs, some funding bodies have slight nuances on the main themes. When I looked at this whole area, in fact, for the NIHR, it's not dissimilar to their previous applicant research backgrounds. Obviously, over the years, you've really gathered we've got some sort of legacy acronyms. We also have sort of legacy research sections, and one of the very common research sections that you'd see in fellowship type applications would be applicant research background. And in fact, the narrative CV is really a more structured version of that, but it actually gives you a template to work with. So yeah, as I said, it replaces your normal CV. So in a sense, if there are some key things, especially for the eligibility for the award, it's worth incorporating them into the narrative CV, because you're not automatically prompted necessarily to say, you've got a 2-1 or a master's in a particular thing. So it's important to talk about those things that are relevant for reviewers to assess your eligibility for the award. Yeah, you can include material that checks the boxes for, as I say, for eligibility assessment criteria. Obviously keep to the 3 pages as requested. It's an opportunity to tell your story more broadly, and you want to include skills acquired in undertaking the work you've presented. So once previously, when you talk about applicant research background, you were very conscious that you've been asked to talk about the skills that you'd acquired. There isn't actually a heading saying what research skills have you acquired previously. So you have to kind of weave that into the narrative. Think always about your impact. NIHR are very concerned about impact. They're very keen to support people who have had impact at whatever level. So if you've undertaken a service evaluation or an audit, and you've changed local practice, or you've developed local guidance, and you've had impact, it's important to highlight that. So think about impact when you're writing your narrative CV. And as I said, it's about qualitative details, not just metrics, although obviously you can pop some metrics in, but you'll probably be picking and choosing particular ones to expand upon. So the sections that you'll always see in a narrative CV for the NIHR are contributions to the generation of new ideas, tools, methodologies, or knowledge, contributions to the development of others and maintenance of effective working relationships, contributions to the wider society, wider research community, contributions to broader society, your suitability for the award. Now, I think as early career researchers or people embarking on a research career, the narrative CV can be quite intimidating. These sorts of things come very naturally, I think, to people who've been in the research game for a while. So as a postdoctoral researcher, you can probably think about all the contributions you've done as part of a research team. But if you're starting out in research, it can be quite difficult. So again, what the narrative CV is trying to do is to get you to think a bit more laterally. No, you may not have been a part of a research team who's delivered this, that, and the other, but you've been part of a clinical team who's done this, that, and the other, and you've delivered this. So it's thinking a bit more laterally, and not to get too phased by some of these headings that make it sound as if you should have done a load of research-related stuff. So if we think first about contributions to the generation of new ideas, tools, methodologies, or knowledge, this is all really about outputs, the outputs that you may have had, the sorts of things that you've produced as part of your work, whether that's clinical audit, if that's service valuation, research, whatever. It can include the development of methods, tools, and resources, new ideas, hypotheses, and it can include sort of peer recognition, because in a sense, if you've been given, you know, come and give a talk about this, it is a sort of marker of quality from your peers. So it's worth thinking about those things. And funding you have won again once before previously in the old-fashioned CV, you'd be asked to list the awards that you've got. It doesn't do that in this. So again, it's pulling out those things that you think are important, best illustrate your skills. And it's worth saying more generally how many funds you might have had. Again, as an early career researcher, you go, well, I don't have any funding. Well, of course, you're at an early stage in your career and you wouldn't necessarily have had any at all. But that's fine, because you'll be judged at where you're at for the award. So if we just think about contributions to the generation of new ideas, tools, methodologies, or knowledge, it might include things like audit, evaluation, or quality improvement programs, as you've said, any conference publications or posters, any research publications, if you do happen to have them, policy publications or policy advice or general guidelines, clinical guidelines. It might also include, specific things like products. If you're, I know actually a number of clinicians who've invented things, data sets, designs more broadly, software code. It might be some evidence synthesis work that you've done. It might even be some sort of audiovisual or exhibition type stuff that you've done, or protocols. So it's very broad ranging. And as people who are embarking on a research career, it doesn't have to concentrate around research outputs, which of course at an early stage you're not necessarily going to have. If we think about the sort of development of others and the maintenance of effective working relationships, so yeah, it can include anything like project management, and these are transferable skills. If you manage projects, it doesn't necessarily have to refer to research projects. You would have learned all sorts of useful things managing any project. Line management generally, supervision or mentoring, establishing or driving collaborations and networks, formal teaching or the development of others, contributions to success in the team or for team members or team working generally, showing that you can work as a team, and the sorts of things that you have facilitated perhaps as a team member, strategic leadership, and providing opportunities for others, so development opportunities for the sorts of things that you might include. I think your suggestions were really good. And what about the wider research community? What sorts of things do you think they're after there? Editing and reviewing, so journals and funding applications, the leadership of activities across disciplines, institutions, and countries. Some people have done that. Committee membership, contributions to open research, active sharing of knowledge and skills, community resources, contributions to improved research integrity or culture, so EDI or rewards and recognition. And EDI and research and the research culture is a very big thing now. So showing how you've contributed to a good working sort of culture, strategic leadership, influencing research or innovation agenda, organising workshops and conferences, working with professional bodies and general positions of responsibility. I mean, obviously this is in relation to the research community. So if you're working in the clinical environment, perhaps you've set up a journal club or a research interest group that people can attend. Contributions to broader society. I think I'll just read this one out because I'm conscious of time. So actions to ensure your research reaches and influences relevant audiences, commercialization, policy engagement and development, partnerships with industry and the public sector, general knowledge exchange between researchers and users of research, blogs and social media outputs. I know Jodie mentioned getting to grips with social media, other impacts across policy, practice and business, patient and public engagement and understanding of research. So these are the sorts of things that you'll find in those sections. And then, of course, there's your suitability for the ward section for the NIHR narrative CV. So it's about detailing the research career that you would like to develop, and this is what it says in its guidance, or that you are developing, and how your experience supports this, that the fellowship that you're applying for, the award or the placement that you're applying for should create a distinct change in your career trajectory. And I think those of you who attended Kate Harvey's presentation this morning could see how central in a way the LA Spark Award was in pushing her forward in her research career. Describing the potential impact of the award and how it will support your aspirations. So basically the trajectory for yourself and future goals, and for the trajectory for your work. And again, perhaps here's an opportunity to pick up on some of those eligibility criteria, things that might not have been incorporated in previous sections of your narrative CV. Generally speaking, be confident, but not overconfident. It's very difficult, I think, to blow your own trumpet. We're all pretty useless at it. But I think there is a line where, an area, a safe area where you're being confident about what you're doing, perhaps not overconfident, and certainly not underconfident. So I really like this cartoon because you're not saying you're the best pizza pies in the world, but you are the best in the block, and that's what people understand. So it's pitching it at the right level. If you're planning to apply for a fellowship in the future, and again, if you are planning to apply for a pre-doc with a view to a doctoral fellowship, start being proactive. So if there are opportunities to get involved with research, with audit, if there are opportunities to get your name on publications or funding applications, then do that. I think as quite junior people starting off in a research career, it's always important to have your antennae out for opportunities. And then if you do take part in these opportunities, to make sure that you get recognition for the work that you've done in the form of, authorship or whatever. And finally, don't panic. I think all along there's been a vibe, certainly from Tanya, who was speaking earlier, that you are going to be judged with your background, stage, and experience in mind. So you're not competing against some super researcher who has a million publications. Basically, there's no way you're going to be put alongside an experienced researcher if you're applying for a pre-doc. And likewise, if you come from a particular clinical discipline or you come from a local authority, the expectations of what you will be like as a person and in terms of your prior experience will fit around that environment in which you've been. So no one is going to put a midwife alongside a medic, for example, in a doctoral application. So you won't be compared to some mythical super researcher. So just bear that in mind. Panels will take your context into account when they're looking at your application.